the September meeting of the Wyoming Board of Education. May I have a roll call?
Mrs. Broderick?
Here.
Mr. Feldmeyer?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mrs. G?
Here.
Mrs. Aller?
Here. Please join me with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And, are we okay on the, okay, we do not have any recognition of the public, so we're gonna go on to a special presentation, with the, ODE report card that came out this week. I believe that, UDLT people are meeting this week to delve in.
Next week.
Next week.
Next week.
Sorry. A little bit there. But I know there will be a lot of investigation, but because it just came out, it seemed wise for
Yep.
Mr. Weber to at least bring us up to date.
Yeah, so, they were just released last week. It is, one snapshot, it's one slice of the pie that shows student success. But it's an important slice, and so we want to make sure that we're looking at the data that comes to us from this report card. And ultimately, we want to use this information to identify where are we excelling, where are students really achieving at high levels, what questions do we have from this data, and how can we use this data to ultimately grow year after year after year. The whole idea of continuous improvement, always learning, which is part of our culture blueprint. And so great conversations come from this information, but again, it's one piece of information. This gets combined with classroom level data, map assessment data, and in the future, the data that we get from our strategic plan, our scoreboard that we're going to be developing this year. So all of that pulled together gives us the whole picture of student success in Wyoming City Schools. What Dr. Whiteley is going to walk us through the report card. It is different this year. There were some changes that were made over the past couple of years. It has moved from letter grades to stars, and I think some of the changes I think give a better sense to how a district overall is doing. But we'll dig a little bit deeper into each of the categories, the major categories. And so Dr. Whiteley, I'll turn it to you, and we can stop and answer any questions that come up throughout the time here.
As Tim mentioned, I think it's really important to look at this through our strategic lens on teaching and learning, and how do we personalize student learning, and how do we create lifelong learners. So again, it's that balance of using it as a snapshot and coupling it also with our own in-house district data, but also still looking at the credibility and the importance of what the information that's presented. One thing I think of note is that although we are getting this data now in September of 2022, this is based on the tests that students took last March and last April, so last spring. So the tests were actually taken last spring, the data is compiled, and then we get this data in the fall every year. So as Tim mentioned, there have been some changes or updates to the report card. Largely the actual components of the report card stayed roughly the same, although they're measured differently. So we still have achievement, progress, which we would call growth or value added sometimes, early literacy, gap closing, graduation, and then this is a mouthful, college, career, workforce, and military readiness, right? CCWM. In the past, there have been grades assigned, so A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. However, we have moved away from that, and now each component will receive a star rating of 1 to 5 stars. And each component has different criteria that establishes those stars. So that's a little bit different. Whereas in the past, a letter grade was kind of a letter grade. So we all kind of said, oh, we kind of know what that means. This is now you have to look at the specific criteria under each to know how you earn each of those levels of stars. So one thing of note is that the college, career, workforce, and military readiness, while there is some data on the report card that you will see, it did not receive a star rating. It will not receive a star rating overall or as an individual component until 2024, 2025. Again, regardless of grades or stars, I think the important part is using this as a narrative about where our students are and coupling that with other pieces of data to see how and where they need to go next.
How is that measured then, college
So we're gonna get to that. We're gonna look at each component and how it's measured. Actually, Jeannie, it has the most kind of components that go into it, you'll see.
Okay.
So the first one, kind of looking at a report card overview, okay? So making sure that first of all, we understand the definitions and what they mean of each component. And then as we look at each component individually, we will look at the specific criteria of how you earn 1 to 5 stars. So when you're talking about achievement, we are looking at how well students performed on tests overall. When we're looking at progress, we are looking at the growth of all students based on their past performances. When we're looking at gap closing, we're measuring the reduction in educational gaps for student subgroups. Okay, and that N number of what accounts for a subgroup has changed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Graduation, you're looking at your cohort graduation rate, and you actually look at two, your 4-year cohort and your 5-year cohort. Early literacy, we are looking at how we are measuring our reading improvement for our earliest learners, kindergarten through 3rd grade. And then last but not least, again, that college, career, workforce, and military readiness, we're looking at how well prepared are our students for future opportunities. And those opportunities can be things like the military, the workforce. Future opportunities can be involvement in AP or IB, and it can also be involvement in college credit plus. So don't just think career, that can also be academic components that exist within our current structure. So as far as the achievement component, okay? First and foremost, I think it's important to look at how do you get 5 stars? Again, we're looking at how our students performed on the state test. But when you look at this criteria right here of 5 stars, basically to get 5 stars, you have to have greater than or equal to 90% of the max score. Okay, to get 4 stars, you have to have greater than or equal to 80%, but less than 90% of the max score. Now the question becomes, what is the max score, right? The maximum performance index score, that's what they're talking about, the maximum performance index score. This year, that number was 107.254, 107.254. And that was based on the average of the highest top 2% of district performance indexes. So they look at all the performance indexes in the state, they take the top 2%, that creates that max performance index score, which is how they got the 107.254. So to get 5 stars, you have to have greater than or equal to 90% of that max score. 90% of that is approximately 96.5 for performance index. So if you scored above that, you get 5 stars, right? If you scored below that, but still in the top 80%, that's when you would get 4 stars, and you keep going down. Yes, sir.
Was the max then based on the top 2% or the top 2 districts?
Top 2%, 2%, yeah. So the top 2% equivalently, if you estimate that we have 640 districts, approximately the top 2% is about the top 12 to 13 districts in the state. That's how they got that number. Okay. So 5 stars, right? We got 5 stars in this category. So achievement. And you're going to see this a little bit bigger on a different slide when we look at it historically. But basically, these are our overall passing rates, okay? In the past, those would have been performance indicators, okay? And they impacted your rating. Now that is not the case. These are a report-only measure within the component, okay? So it's just looking at what percentage passed the test, okay? In the past, that marker, again, when it was weighing into your scoring, that marker was 80%. But again, right now, this is only a report only, okay? Now, this goes into our performance index score, okay? So our performance index this year was 103.3, okay? Our aim or our goal for our performance index score was 107 for this year. So a little bit different, and we'll look at that when we look at our historical data. But I think of note here is that this category over here where you see advanced plus, advanced, accomplished, proficient, basic, limited, and untested. Those are the level of achievement that a student can make on a test, okay? And each test a student takes is assigned an achievement level based on that test score, and they earn points for those. So I think of note right here, though, is if you look at these top ones, 1.3 all the way down to proficient, okay? Proficient is considered passing. Those are separated by 0.1, right? 1.0 to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. However, when you get to not passing, basic and limited, those drop significantly, the point values, right? This is 0.6, this is 0.3. So we had 7.6% of our students who scored basic. They got 0.6 points for that level, and that's 4.6 points we received for that. Versus here, right? We had 0.5%, 1.3 times the point, that gives you 0.6. Also of note, if you're looking at this slide, you might notice this bottom category where it says untested, okay? Untested, we had 0.6% of students. What that means is there were 19 testing experiences, not 19 children, 19 testing experiences, because some grade levels have more than one test that are given. So there were 19 testing experiences that were opted out of. That's important to note because those children received 0 points every time that they opted out of that test. Not the student, but every test that was opted out got 0 points. Not the 0.3, not the 0.6, not the 1.2. They got 0. Right? So that certainly, right, so that will certainly impact your performance index score.
This opt-out, that was a COVID thing, wasn't it?
No, opting out actually has, it's always existed. It even existed in the days of Park. However, I think it has become, I think COVID, it became a more common practice, maybe because of not being in the building or not wanting to be amongst people. But no, it has always existed even since Park.
Have these numbers, the number of kids that opt out, have they gone up? Have you looked at like since COVID, like, you know, there's all the talk of stressing kids and, you know, maybe more.
I would have to go back and
I
look at
think it's
that.
probably higher than pre-COVID numbers.
For sure, higher.
Lower than COVID.
I mean, it's just more of a curiosity.
I think it's interesting because there's a slide later that shows historical year differences, and so if there's more people opting out, that's hurting.
That's hurting us, especially in a smaller district. You know.
We know the number of students that opted out. If there's 19 experiences, do we know what that equates to the number of students?
We quickly looked at that, but we did not get granular enough. I think at the primary, there were maybe like 2 or 3, and then at the high school, there were more of those, but high school students sometimes take more tests as well, depending on the grade level that they're in.
In terms of the driver for opting out, is it largely people wanting to avoid the stress and just not doing the test or getting, or what tends to be a lot of people opt out? The most likely.
That or just the velocity of testing in general, over testing, that our children are over tested. Yeah. So as Ilya mentioned, kind of looking at this historically, right? Kind of wanting to see these patterns over a 6-year period. This year we got a 103.3. Again, our aim was last year when we set the goal was 107. So there is definitely some room for growth, but I think the important thing is to see we did improve from our COVID years, right? During COVID, if you look in 1920 and 2021, there is a decrease or a dip in our performance index. However, just a reminder, the average increase or decrease rather, the average decrease across the state was 10%, and we only saw a 9%. So we are on the rise again. A performance index score, not to be confused with that maximum performance index where the stars are calculated, but a perfect performance index is out of 120.
So if the measures have changed, is it that helpful to look at this history?
There is a that certainly comes into play in the narrative there. You're absolutely right. The criteria that is used to go into that versus before, kind of those performance indicators had bearing on your overall kind of your grade or your label, whereas now they're measures only and you're rated on that maximum performance index and your ability to get at least 90% of that. So the measure has changed.
So you take the grades out, or take the measures out, the numbers are calculated similarly to how they have been before.
Yeah.
So this is an apples to apples comparison.
So it is, yeah, that was very.
This right here is apples to apples. Yes. Okay. So this is by building your historical view, and this is the passage. How many scored proficient or above? So they passed the test, not basic or limited, which we were hovering between 12 and 13% in that category overall. But again, 80% or above used to be kind of the performance index marker. That is not the case now, but I think it's also good to keep that just as a frame of reference, right? That's the primary. This is the middle school. And those highlights that you see are based on that previous 80% kind of marker, right? Just to kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
ELA.
Fifth grade science, right? Pretty big increase there, 84.3% to 93.7%. Definitely some of those areas in red, still very much growth opportunity. When you look at, fifth grade math and you look at, eighth grade math, right?
Eighth grade math is significant.
Remember, eighth grade math, is based on our students who are in at grade level math. So that is not our, students who are taking like algebra 1 and geometry. Those are reflected in the high school score. So those are our students who are eighth graders in eighth grade math.
And that's never, I mean, it's a fair amount, but that, I know fluctuates, but. 40.
At the high school, that's about 40
Or
kids.
like
At the
an
middle
84.
school, I'd have to get more
Remember.
granular to be able to answer that question. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. At the high school, it goes between one section and two sections when you look at algebra 1 grade level. But I'd have to go back and look at the area data for sure.
Pre-COVID, that number of kids who were on grade level
Yep.
was still
Yep.
84%.
And that's one of the questions when we were looking at our data is what happened, what changed, what is there to be able to help attribute that, right? And I think that's the question we always want to ask, whether you see a spike in data, like that 93.7, right? What caused that, right? Because we want to replicate that, or what changed the data, right? I think those are all the questions that we have to try to find the answer to so that we can change the narrative for the next year, whether that's for the positive or not.
Like the one number on the board, say the really high ELA fifth grade that went down from last year, whereas all the others went up. Different grades, I guess ELA was pretty high. Ah, shit, that's 43 to 37. That's good. Understand what that is. Scientists, everybody.
Yeah, but I do know some teachers were talking about that for math specifically to not be in the fact that it just got, they felt the hit a little bit differently. I mean, who knows? I don't know. They all.
This is high school data. You'll see that, not counted in NA, that is because the, state changed, what courses would be tested. So that's why that data is no longer available. There's no longer a state test in ELA, 1, which is ninth grade English. So that algebra 1 score that you're seeing there, that is all students in the district that took algebra 1. Okay, to see the high school score of algebra 1 passage for students on grade level is about 54% that passed that of just high school, it's mainly freshmen taking algebra 1. It was 54% versus the 43% we saw in eighth grade math. So progress component. Any questions about achievement before we continue? Okay. So the progress component, again, you're looking at value added. We're looking at the growth that all students are making based on their past performance. Just a reminder that our value added subjects are grades 4 through 8 in reading and math, grades 5 and 8, not through, 5 and 8 in science, and then in high school, that is ELA and math in the course exam. So this one, again, has some different criteria. It's not based on that 90% anymore to get your 5 stars. It is based on a growth index of at least 0.2 or +2, excuse me, a growth index of at least +2 and an effect size of at least +0.1. So let's talk about exactly what that means, okay? A growth index is a measure of statistical certainty, okay? So basically it's compiled over several years of growth data and it helps determine the certainty that the expected growth did happen, okay? Whereas the effect size is the value that tells us the magnitude of academic growth relative to the state as a whole. So think of it as 0. Okay, think of it as 0.
Yep.
The farther away from zero you are, the better off, right? You want to get above +2, right? Okay? Versus you don't want to be below, right? So that green level is kind of like your 0, right? That's kind of like your base, right? You're hitting the state marker of growth. So if you remember our track analogy in the past, that you made it one lap around the track, remember that? That's kind of that green color, okay? And then from that is your growth. So how certain were you going to do it and how much did you actually do it as far as growth? So that's the growth index is the certainty at which you do it and the effect size is how much you grew, okay? So these colors of slate and light blue, again, the farther away you are from that zero, you meet the +2, but that effect size is what's different. Okay. Again, right here means significant growth happened. Okay. This means that you met the state expectation of growth. In our old language, you made 1 lap around the track. Okay. This means we have some areas that we didn't meet that expected growth.
I know, you can see
But
that.
I don't feel like-
You don't see the panel.
I'm sorry, I see the
That's
button.
adorable. I'm like, you're.
I would like.
None of us can see that.
So a different way to look at this, okay, different way to look at this is right here. Thanks for telling me that, it sounds like. So first of all, these colors are horrible, okay? Because when you
Well,
look at it, you see this slate
Not the
color.
ratings,
Not the ratings, the colors
the use of
themselves,
the colors,
right?
right?
Because you would think they would use like red, yellow, and green, right? That slate blue color means significant growth was made.
Great, you do feel it's.
Right? It's kind of like a mark, it looks like it's like blurring it out, like that didn't happen, right? No, all of those slaty blue colors mean significant growth happened, okay? That kind of pucey green color, right, means that you made expected growth, okay? So we see that in 5th grade ELA, we see that in 4th grade across all tests as well, okay? And then you see those red areas, right? Red still means kind of like the stoplight. You should stop and notice, right? That means they made less progress than expected. Okay, so our growth did not meet the state expectations. And then that kind of ashy gray means that there's value added not available for that grade because it was not a tested area as you see in science. So again, these were probably not the colors we would have chosen for the graph. So we just want to make sure that we pinpoint that kind of slaty blue is a good thing, that you see an abundance of, that is a good thing, right? If you remember charts from the past, they've not always looked like this, right? We are seeing improvement in growth, which I think is a plus, right? That's where we really want to make sure that not only are all students learning, but all students are growing as well. Okay. The next section is our early literacy component, and this measures reading improvement and proficiency kindergarten through 3rd grade. And to get 5 stars, you are looking at 88% to 100%, so you exceed the state standard. To get 4 stars, it's from 78% to less than 88%. But talking about percentages, I think it's important to understand how this component is measured, okay? It has 3 different components that you're rated on to get your stars. So proficiency in 3rd grade reading. And if you look at that kind of 89.9% right there, that is our proficiency in 3rd grade reading. How many students scored proficient in the 3rd grade when they took the test? Promotion to 4th grade, that is the 98.7%. How many of our students are promoted from 3rd to 4th grade? They advance their normal grade level. And then the last one is improving K through 3 literacy. So how are we supporting our struggling readers? And that's that big chart on the left. 19 students moved to be on track. Okay, so all 3 of those components, again, if you go back to our stars, you have to get from 88 to 100% in all 3 of those kind of measures collectively to get that 5 stars. If you're from 78% to 88%, you get the 4 stars, but they look at those 3 collectively. Okay. Gap closing measures how we are reducing the gap, right? You don't want there to be a gap, reducing the gap in your subgroups or your measured groups of students, different student populations. I mentioned that the N had changed, right? The amount of students that you need to make a subgroup. In the past, that was 25, then it went to 20. Now that number is 15, okay? And that is because we believe all kids should learn, right? All kids, no kids should be left behind, and you should decrease that gap to make sure that all are performing. So for this particular one, to get 5 stars, the range has to be greater than or equal to 60% of the possible earned points, okay? So I have a couple slides for this. This one is achievement, okay? This one is achievement. You're going to see another one for growth. And again, if you remember, this is about that kind of that performance index language, right? That you have 90% of the max score piece. So as you look at the red, the little red dots, those are all of kind of our state standards, our state measures. All of our students, all of our subgroups kind of surpass that, okay? In ELA and in math, okay? Now, This is growth. Okay, if you remember, growth is again effect size, right? And then also the, name is escaping me. Thank you, the index, right? And that index is set at 2. When remember, we're looking at 0, below, -2, above 2, that's where that red line is that you see on the growth and how much is past that or how much we are still to reach that. And you see the different subgroups there, that we have represented. You know, you have students with disabilities, you have, economically disadvantaged. The purple at the very top is all students, right? Sometimes I think that's deceiving because you think it's a different subgroup, that's all students, right? Versus, the green is our Caucasian students, the aqua is our special education students, our economically disadvantaged is the kind of that mustardy, yellow. The orange is, multiracial, and our kind of magenta color is our African American, our Black students. And then last but not least, over in the English language arts, you'll also see, that kind of teal color, which is our Hispanic group.
What is the, in terms of looking at the economic disadvantage, what's the measure that is receiving?
Free and reduced lunch. Now, that means that they have, I think there's a qualifier there, I should add, that they have applied to receive that. So that's the only benchmark we know.
Or they qualified through some other automatic measure, so they were a beneficiary of some state program that entitled them to some sort of assistance. Because that was difficult last year because families didn't have to apply for free lunch.
And when we look at our, again, coupling this with other data, when you look at our growth data on math, right? Some of these narratives are starting to align, right? And causing us to wonder and notice and ask questions, whether that's specific to our curriculum, whether that's specific to our teaching strategies, whether that's specific to the subgroup and trying to figure out how that plays out. So it's good when you couple all of that data to create that larger narrative.
In the English, there's a Hispanic group, and the math, there's not, is that May-size? In terms of why there's not in the math?
I would have to go, if they could have not tested, they could have opted out for that. They could, I mean, it could be a variety of things. I don't know that off the top of my head either. Because you would think if they show up in one area, they would show up in another. Yeah, I'm waiting to, and that could be an opt-out situation, I'm not sure. It also went, well, if it's, it might be when they actually, might have been new to the district and the timing of when that student or students entered. That maybe the math window, now that I think about that, that math window might have already happened. Yeah. If it's what I'm thinking. Graduation component. This looks at how our graduation rates fare as far as a 4-year cohort and a 5-year cohort. A cohort simply means that the first time that you are entered into the system as a freshman, that becomes your cohort. Right, so the first year that you become listed as a freshman, basically you have 4 years to graduate, or you have 5 years to graduate, depending on your timeline. And so we get both of those measures. The graduation rate to get 5 stars is 96.5%. You will see in this in both the 4-year and the 5-year graduation cohort, we exceed that. This is always a strength of ours, an area that I think that we always do very well in, whether it's stars or letter grade. Last but not least is our career, college, workforce, and military readiness component. We did not receive a rating, a starred rating for this. And again, that is because it will not appear for a couple more years, 24, 25. However, there are multiple aspects that go into this. Okay, and like I mentioned, you get, and they have not revealed the weighting that each of these categories have. Okay, so I don't have that data for you quite yet. And I think that will probably have some bearing on the next slide you're going to see. This is very preliminary data, that if we were to get a score this year, they would have based it off this information. That the total points would have been 113 or 65.7%. Now the question is, how did they arrive at that number? And we don't know, okay? Because, and this is going to be this is very small print, okay? But I just wanted you to see kind of the data that exists right now for some of these categories. So that top line is ACT participation at 97.1%. The next line, is ACT remediation free. That was 72.1%. That means students who enter college without having to take, that meet all the thresholds without remediation. Every subject has a different free remediation score, so it's not a universal. And I won't go through each of these, but I just wanted you to see like ACT performance, ACT, that kind of middle of the road. You can't see my clicker, but, honors diploma, we had 54.7% of students meet that. The farther down you go, that next big line is AP participation, 85.5%. Again, each of these categories has a different weighting of what points you receive for each one, and we don't have that criteria yet because they're not measuring it. But I wanted you to see, when you see a percentage of 65.7%, you go, what could that be attributed to? This at least can give you a little bit of a pulse or feel. There's actually a second part of this screen I didn't take a snapshot of, and those are things where we didn't earn points in, and that's not necessarily a negative. It's just that we don't have students taking advantage of those opportunities sometimes, like work keys or career rating of aptitude tests, things of that nature. It's just that our culture tends to play out differently in the network of where they distribute their time. So, kind of next steps moving forward and reflection. We have been looking at this data as an internal leadership team. We've actually met with all three building principals to kind of look at their preliminary data and get them to start thinking in the data. Our next step will be to take this to DLT next week to have those same questions about what do we notice, what do we see, what are our questions, kind of like we had, like what caused that data to change. From there, DLT will take that to BLT, which is our building leadership teams, which include our department chairs. And then going through that process, go all the way back to individual departments and have those conversations about their individual test data and grade levels. This data is important, right? And we need to use it to look at the narrative of where we are and where we want to go for all students, right? And for all buildings. And again, albeit a snapshot, we can couple that with other data to really get a complete picture of where our learners are. The other piece that I think is important, and thanks to Susan for these adorable pictures. You know, we want to better understand our students as learners, and we certainly want to understand their data through tests, but we also want to make sure that we are meeting them as whole children. My English teacher and me used to be whole children, right? In that there is a snapshot of data, but it is a complete picture. And part of our district is our academic prowess, but it's so much more than that as well. It's about our social emotional learning. It's about our culture of belonging. It's about our financial stewardship. And all of those pieces of our strategic plan that really create that complete picture. And so again, we're just going to use this data to better understand our students and help personalize their learning so that they can get better each and every day.
Very helpful. So then back to that very, you don't have to flip the slides, but it was like the third slide. I realized I was just looking at the reading, not the stars, but those are true. I didn't even look.
Yeah.
I was waiting until I
Yeah.
didn't want to look it up.
And we can,
I just wasn't sure if it was.
No, that was,
You know what I mean?
yeah, that was,
I thought it.
Right?
I was kind of thinking the same thing. That
Yes.
was-
Verify it was our ratings and then.
yep, so here we are. Achievement is 5 stars, progress 5 stars, gap closing is 5 stars, graduation rate is 5 stars, college and career readiness is yet to be determined, and early literacy is 4 stars. And again, that early literacy component was based on those 3 components, right? Promotion, and then how many pass the test, and then how many struggling readers are you looking.
But you're right, I love that you still break it down, because when you look at that, you're like, we're doing great, it's 5 stars. And then when you really look at it, it's, as you were saying, to like, where can we be?
And this is the district snapshot, and the individual building report cards, right? Have a little bit different spin on some of this data at different times. So looking at those and comparing those and really getting into that at the building levels is going to be important.
But so, let's say quickly then, like, yeah, closing growth, just have been able to be on DLT for a little bit. I know that's been an ongoing conversation, so it's really great that, we continue to look at it, and then it kind of had to pause there for COVID, obviously. But it is great, you see the 5 stars, but then you look at where some of the kids aren't getting,
right,
like, some of the kids aren't getting better.
and we've had this conversation where in the past, we've not seen on the whole growth like that. And so we're excited about some things, but then when you dig a
Right.
little bit deeper, you find other opportunities. And the buildings have really been engaged in fabulous conversations about data and how do we use this information, how do we use math information, how do we use the classroom assessment information to better understand kiddos, and really think about curriculum construction and how we assess kids. And again, it's that continual growth process, but using this strategically and intentionally, right, to identify areas.
So
that we
say
can target.
you're like
Good.
a 8th grade math teacher, or if this was, I guess, forget my example, but say you are an individual teacher and you see some red in areas that you may impact. Do they have the ability to dig in at a detailed level to sort of see more than we're seeing, like holes, or is it just like the score? I mean, what level of detail?
So we'll get, so they can dig maybe a little bit deeper, but in November, we'll also be getting value-added information for individual teachers. And so any teacher who teaches in a value-added area will get additional feedback from these assessments, unique to them. And that actually prompted a calendar change this year. We have an additional professional development day. And that's to have those data level conversations so that teachers can dig deeper individually and think about, okay, let's think about this grade. And maybe it's a particular grade ELA, but then let me think about my own students and how my students perform in my classroom. They'll be able to get to a whole nother level with that information.
And I think you saw that in 5th grade science, you know, that increase we saw in 5th grade science, there was some really deliberateness of, taking the standards and taking assessments and comparing them, am I capturing, the depth of the standard? Am I asking the questions in a similar, format or way? I don't know if you recall, but Lori Miller talked about just the fact that there was just a glaring, absence of charts and graphs, right, on kind of the day-to-day assessments versus a science assessment on a test. There is a reading component of like a graph and chart there. So just kind of upping that and making sure students have additional practice, attributes to kind of some of that growth, I think, that you saw and achievement.
Yeah, though it's those kinds of conversations are happening all over, which I think is showing in the changes in growth that we're seeing. And so it's continuing to learn from how those trends have started.
I can't recall, can you be an individual in the different subsets of
Yeah,
given? I
yeah.
thought
So you could be a
the same
talent-
student who hits
Yeah, you
maybe
hit
2 or 3 bits.
Absolutely.
Like, you could be a student who is, like socioeconomically disadvantaged, probably have a disability and be skipping.
And you count in all subgroups.
What is it? Multiracial.
Multiracial.
So that they pick when they're assessing, and is that part of the test itself, like they identify, they're taking the test, like?
So actually, they identify, not on the test, they identify when they enroll into the district. And that's associated with their SSID number, which is then connected to the test. So they don't actually report on the test, they report their enrollment.
No, let's think about it, because I think there's data that shows when you identify yourself as African American in the study, like in standardized test, your scores are lower as a result of just all the things you think about yourself relative to the whole process. So helpful to understand those are disconnected, and that's not the driver of this. On the math piece, like so at the middle school, what are thoughts? Like, I guess we'll talk some of the team. When you talk about ways we leverage learning, in science and other things, how will, I don't know if it's the department, for middle school, like, how will they come together to look at the data and then determine how we help our students? Not so much the scores on the test, just like whatever this says. In 6th grade is 89%, is that right?
Yeah, I think,
So I just,
just an interesting point here is, the restart readiness assessments that you've heard Jennifer talk about that the state offered starting this past year. 6th grade as a whole, really embraced those restart readiness and kind of gave those as a collective. Not saying that is the only difference, but that is a, they were,
school kind of thing.
no, there was some of that, but they actually give it, They give kind of some benchmarks, there's some like pulse assessments, and then there's one, I believe, in the fall as well. Now, again, that's one, one change that they made, doesn't mean it's all attributable to this, right? The other thing I think, in 8th grade or in math, we talk about math across the board, there is conversation about our acceleration path, right? And things about our intervention, that we do, with certain groups of, with certain groups of kids in math. So I think that is being looked at this year to make sure that that is still, our philosophy, and to make sure that that is rooted in really data-informed decisions. And the math department and I are working together with building administration to work through that piece.
So just deciding post 4th grade, what your path is, like, is that a good idea for most kids to,
When
not
do-
most, but any kids who do double advanced or whatever the,
Just starting to ask the questions of what do other districts do? Why do we do it this way? Is it best to do it this way? What does our data say? Looking at, your OST results versus the leveling that you're in and trying to compare those and then compare those to our math data. So really just trying to triangulate data to create a complete narrative.
and I know this is really a lot, we still have to think about COVID, even though other schools and, everybody's having to look at this year's report with the COVID mind, but that is still very, like, you just really want to dive in, why is it that dramatically different there in 8th grade? Just feels like an anomaly.
I think too, the narrative, when you do have all these levels, it's wonderful, and you try to meet everybody, and then kids sometimes they're in grade level. It's tough, their confidence gets a little, so it's not, sometimes it's teaching, but it's also the culture of like, do math, or you're like, you're actually in grade level math, but the amount of things that I've heard students say about their own confidence maybe of being in some of that, when people know it's just one little bit that I would add to.
Yeah, I was interested when we did the math book textbook adoption discussion, how much talk was about confidence in math and building that.
And I think that extends all the way to our primary, as well. I know Gina has talked about that, and that comes with building that fluency and building that conceptualization, so that when you do come to a level of abstract math, which you experience in algebra, that you're able to make that transition a little bit smoother because you have that foundational skills.
Is there ever any accounting for, say, turnover or change from year to year? One teacher switches out and that level of inspiration, motivation might change for good or for not?
Or I think also just familiarity with the content, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I remember, when you teach something once versus you've taught something for 5 or 6 years, it does make a difference in your understanding and just nuancing of how you deliver instruction and instructional strategies.
The comments you made about mindset, as you talk about how do you think about yourself in basic math, because there is this double advantage, single, and I must be done if I'm in grade level. But then the confidence piece too, with math in particular, I always think about, because it's always, you're gonna be learning something you don't already know. And so how the growth mindset kind of has been expect, that's a part of the process. But you kind of learn how to learn, and you believe you're a learner, and you believe you're capable, and how all that impacts, mindset. When you get defeated on a certain concept and you go to another one, you're like, at a certain point, you're like, let me just try to hide, try to not be found out, these tests, you can't.
And I think that's really, when we talk about our MTSS model, that's super important on how do you fill that gap? How do you fill that content skill? Because in something that does grow upon each other, right? Once you get behind, you have to make sure to fill in that gap where you keep feeling that.
And I'm just wondering too, like, because of that building on, when you're looking at a drop like that, you're looking at what didn't get built upon the year before as well. Because of the online and what may have been missed, chunks that were missed there. So it's really, again, I'm looking at that math, but I feel like we have so many exceptional math teachers. And, I think the really good math teachers also become great coaches, for things like the mindset and all of that, just that particular number is curious.
Theory, would it be that the 74 from 2021, that is the 7th grade, became the 37.5 in 21-22?
Can you say that for me again?
So,
I'm sorry.
based on the progression from this year to this year, is it that these kids became the ones who were tested there because they progressed from seventh grade to eighth grade between those years? So some of them were out because they're kind of doing high school math or something. But
There is,
generally, those are the populations. So it's
generally,
not,
yeah.
we're comparing this group to this group, or whether they missed something in COVID that they didn't have, and that's why it's down.
yeah, that is
It's more
correct.
like this group to this
Correct.
group, say the kids who were
Yep.
pulled out.
Yep.
But even like 18, 19, that group, like the 83 to 80 to 43, like. That,
Fifth grade.
that's the one I can't.
Right, that's my case. We don't have that.
Yeah, but it is.
They were 84 and a half in fifth grade.
Well,
So
no,
much-
maybe down at.
So much to it.
But the grid is all aligned, you know. It's all of it.
So in a simple way, it's really looking at all of this and finding out where are our students really excelling, where they really growing. And we have growth data that we have not seen before to look at.
Yeah.
And then think about the challenge that becomes to think about what are the strategies that are being used where kids are truly growing, and how do we replicate the strategies across the board.
Right.
And to think about the cause for data, regardless of what the data says.
Yeah.
What are some of the cause factors of that? And work with that, which is exactly what those conversations are looking like.
Thank you.
I didn't want to miss what you said earlier about how the district is dealing with data, today versus a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago. So I do think there's so much to work with this that you can leverage to sort of embrace, engage, sort of continue progressing. Or if you don't deal well with that, you sort of want to explain it or not deal with it. So I'm excited about that progression, which I do think is a testament to culture and the way we've sort of dealt with that in the past. So that's a good thing when they're back.
And have standards changed, like, I know I'm still
In
down
some
the
areas-
rabbit hole of
In
that.
some areas, yeah.
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 Cool, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We'll go to the board committee reports. Finance committee met a couple hours ago. Would you like to?
I'd love to.
I mean,
It was a
I'd be
very
glad
deep
to.
dive, lengthy, meaty
Spend
discussion
a lot of time.
that Rhonda will explain.
None of their adjectives said it was fun, were great.
Oh.
Oh,
State finance, you think fun.
We did meet earlier this evening and we did have a very busy agenda. We took the opportunity to review the financial components of the report card. So with the release of the report card last week, there is a financial component where ODE reports both some expenditure per pupil data. One of the components that we are super proud of is that we spend 76.3% of our budget on instruction. And that gives us a ranking of 2 in our comparison group, which is about 265 districts across the state who are districts like us, similar in size. So we've been consistently 1 or 2 in that ranking for the past 5 or 6 years. And so super proud of that. And that shows up in our 5-year forecast and is certainly part of our stewardship pillar that we work really hard to make sure that we target our resources as best we can towards instruction. Another component is the reporting of expenditure per pupil. And so we talked about, we are above the state average, but we looked at some benchmark districts, some districts like us across the state, and then some districts like us around the Cincinnati region, just to make sure we aren't an outlier. And if we are, then we kind of want to understand why. So, we don't make decisions about our expenditures based on what others are choosing with their budgets, but certainly we use it as a tool just to make sure that we aren't at one extreme or the other. And if we are, then we kind of want to know why. But we are happy with our placement, and that's some good data for us to just continue to review when the financial components of the report card come out. On the agenda later tonight is approval of fiscal year 23 appropriations. So the finance committee took a little bit deeper dive at that. We also looked at the salary benefit analytic, which is what we do at every finance committee meeting, just as an internal control measure, make sure that we're on target. Nothing out of the ordinary with our forecast for salaries and benefits, because it's about 86% of our budget. We also talked about a potential opportunity that might come to the board at an October planning meeting regarding some debt that we have expiring. So we sort of talked through the details of that, and we'll bring that to the full board at October planning. And then we also talked about some sort of cross-committee work, embarking on the next step of primary facility planning. Remember that the CAC led a study last school year on primary facility planning and made a recommendation that, yes, the board needed to indeed move forward with some additional planning for, what we need to do with our primary facilities over the next few years. And certainly that's aligned with the work that's coming out of our strategic plan as well. So we talked about a partnership. The district is working with a local architect firm, SWC, Voorhees and Associates, to get started on that process. They're going to help us work through how to best understand the options that are available for us with primary facility planning, and certainly the costs associated with all of those options.
All right, thank you. Questions? Then we'll move on. Citizens Advisory Committee, you had your first meeting?
We did.
Yeah.
We did. We met last week, and at the meeting, we had a chance to meet our new members and talk about the studies. We have 2 studies this year. One is focusing on weighted grades and how other school districts compare to Wyoming, and how we look at using weighted grades and recognition for our graduates. And the other study is focused on gifted services, what gifted service delivery options are out there, how do other school districts address the needs of gifted students, and how do other school districts identify students for gifted services. And so again, thanks to our community members, our staff members who volunteer their time to be part of those important study groups. We will be meeting again tomorrow, and those teams will be able to get situated and begin the research on those 2 studies. And then in the spring, they'll present to the CAC group and then come to the Board of Education for both of those.
Great, thank you.
Who are the new members in the community? I know you maybe said it before. I want to catch you off guard.
Right, I might just, I don't have them written in front of me.
Well, we.
No,
Susie can pull them up.
I really know why I was
So,
Justin Bolarski,
Oh, right.
Nathan Lee, Lauren Fernandez, Kelly Churchwright, I'm forgetting one.
Teachers. Maybe it's the teachers I did. It's
No.
the teachers.
And then we have returning community members, Lynn Haid, Ross Bartel, Ernest Davis, Leah Wall, and then the new teachers,
yeah, I don't think we need the new teacher.
The teachers I did.
Virginia Hatzick, Effie, Jada, and,
So we might have another addition from the student.
Perfect. Great.
It's great.
The belonging committee.
Sorry, didn't mean to throw my pen. I'll start off with that also. Thank you. So we also recently met. We met on the 6th, and again, this was a chance to meet our new members, talk about the work of the Belonging and Inclusion Collaborative, and the work that we will do to really just help support creating a culture where everyone feels valued, connected, and this true sense of belonging. And so that committee does that through learning themselves about how to create inclusive cultures in a school district, and then sharing that learning out within our school district. So we're talking a lot about how we can take that learning out to the district, whether it be during professional development days, staff meetings, department meetings, just trying to grow as a committee and then share that growth with the district. Ultimately, so it impacts students and helps students to feel this great sense of belonging along with staff and families. I think you would add to that.
No, we did an exercise on not to put people in boxes, or at least not to keep them in boxes, but to place them there, and so that was very illuminating. I thought about that for a couple of days following our meeting. So it's a good introduction, good vibe, good spirit in the room. So a lot of optimism going forward.
Yeah, we were surprised, not surprised, when we were looking at the people who were applying, we were just thinking like, it's really hard to get on committees in our district relative to what your criteria or qualifications are. I know people in this thing are either working in the space of DEI and all these other things, a lot of informed, engaged folks in this year's group. And even as people who talk about rolling off in previous years, how we just encourage them to start little fires everywhere, you know, and start doing things that kind of generates momentum and just people say, what are you doing here or there versus having it all be formal and required to be kind of blanket across. And so that freedom, I think, we're given that, I think will help us just keep making progress in different spaces.
Right, good. Does anyone have any community engagement they'd like to report on? We've certainly gone back to work full time here. Kind of daily stuff happening.
We don't have those open houses, I'm just looking at a review from the last meeting, so finishing up
Right.
open houses.
Open houses, sports events,
Sports events.
harvest festival.
Coming up on the, oh, that's next.
Coming up.
You got
Oh, sorry, not
people
Harvest
signed up
Fest,
for
sorry,
fall
Harvest
festival.
Are you full now or you're on track?
Never from.
I signed up today. I saw there was double slots, I was trying to figure out if it was okay.
It has been full force.
Okay, all right, so I'll just move on then. Facilities committee.
Rhonda shared, some updates on the work happening with the primary facilities
Right.
and really making that point to move to ultimately have conversations with our community about options. We also, we met as the facilities committee on, I think, August 31st. And, shared the updates on some of the projects that were happening during the summer that are continuing and nearing the end of their stages. One of the projects is the roof on the board office here, HVAC work at the high school, and then the special education room. There's yard work happening right next to it as well, and that's in the dark. So we're efficiently using our time. The other project then was the special education room at the high school. That's in its final stages. So we're nearing the end of all of those, which is a really good thing.
All right, good.
Ron, anything you would add? Anyone?
No, high school HVAC, board office, high school life skills, reviewed the CAC study.
I know, and it
Talked
really,
about the, Wolfie's proposal and how that works.
Yeah.
Partnership with them is gonna work with the community to review primary facilities and generate options for us to review.
it ties into your finance committee, the exact same work, but just even seeing that proposal, it's very, just like the work they put into the flow chart of how it would work and all the steps of, like, really the
Absolutely.
thoughtfulness of it. Was,
I like the idea of a big picture from outside our district, even though much of the research we have done ourselves already or in the process of doing, or we'll be able to partner up with them and get, hopefully, an idea that we can then take to the community. and-
it makes you feel better about it,
Community is
very,
fun.
very informed about.
And I
when
think
it
just
goes
like
to
the,
community.
yeah, sorry to do that, just like the search for Tim to bring in that professional group, I really think helped us get our best candidate. And
Right.
I think the same with presenting the options for what needs to happen in the primary facilities. Working with a group to help us, have that conversation with as many people as possible and present clear options will be really great.
Planning and goal setting, I guess, really what we want to talk about is the fact that at our last board planning meeting, we had all three of the grade blocks came and told us, gave us a great picture of what their goals are going to be for this coming year. And then we look forward. I think we all liked that meeting, and then we all liked the meeting in the spring when they report back. So that was a great meeting. It went on.
We just have to curve more.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, we told them 10 minutes one year. 15
The next one.
Give them each an hour.
Formative.
It is very helpful. So that was very helpful. The policy, we just set a meeting. We've got some legal alerts to, maybe discuss with you, and then the policy will be coming up in October, and we'll act upon those. And student achievement.
Yeah, next Thursday.
Yeah, I scared you all by saying you're going to be meeting
We-
this
we
week.
did, yeah.
Sorry.
And so as you heard tonight, one of the things that we'd love to do is, take some of this data, I think this conversation on the district and floor cards too, the district leadership team. It got incredible,
When you don't need
Oh,
the
that's right.
screen, that's
Okay.
nice.
we got incredible teacher leaders in that group, and so sharing this information, talking about how it
Right.
can be utilized, how can teams dig into this within their department teams will be a valuable next step in the process.
All right, thank you. The treasurer's report.
Thanks, Jeannie. Item A, approval of the minutes from the meetings, the regular meeting on August 22nd and the planning meeting on September 13th. Item B, approve the statement of revenues and expenditures for August 31st. Item C, accept with appreciation the list of donations. Item D, fiscal year 23 appropriations. Just a reminder that we've been running on temporary appropriations. This is in accordance with the timeline as provided in Ohio law. We run on temporaries until we certify our balances to the county auditor, county budget commission. They certify them back to us, and once we receive that certification, then the board can adopt appropriations for the school year, and we're required to do that by October 1st. We're right in time there. Item E is approval of the report, please.
All right, may I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report? May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call?
Mr. Feldmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Barker?
Yes.
Thank you.
Superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. Put the glasses on for this. In item A, we have several personnel items. Number one being a new van driver, the approval of a new van driver, which is great to have to support our students. Number two is recommendation to approve these non-supplemental contracts. So I'll give you some time if you'd like to look at those. These are great opportunities that we are so appreciative of our staff for fulfilling these needs. We talk about student engagement and what it means to our kids. And these are incredible opportunities for kids to be engaged.
In both the middle and the high.
Yeah.
And there are some primary, but mostly middle and high. There was one.
I know you get a description, thrive and survive. I know that's a volunteer.
That mental health awareness, just finding balance and wellness and mindfulness. So kind of an extension of our SEL. Part of our strategic plan actually was in existence last year as well. And I think just different opportunity for students to kind of decompress in the afternoon, maybe before they start their activities or homework in the evening.
Okay. Any others? I had asked a question earlier about esports, and Mrs. Johnson then told me about the incredible college majors
Yeah.
nowadays in various esports that are positive and lucrative
It is a growing field,
opportunity. So
absolutely. Yeah.
incredible. All right, sir, I think.
Okay, so we'll continue on then. Number three is a recommendation to approve extended days for one of our school psychologists. And these are for duties that happen before and after the school year.
Okay.
Number four, recommendation to approve these auditory management hours. And so some of those hours come from school events that we need that work to happen with. And then some of them are from facility rentals. They come from outside the school district.
Okay.
Number five is recommendation to approve these athletic supplemental contracts. These are for one individual who will be doing weightlifting for the winter, spring, and summer seasons. This person was approved for the fall. We're continuing that approval for the rest of the school year. Number six, recommendation to approve rest of training. This allows these individuals on the agenda to be mentors for our new staff. Number seven, is a recommendation to approve these individuals for either Friday study or library duty. And so Friday study is a support for high school and middle school, and then library duty supports students who are staying after school in the library at the high school. Number eight is a recommendation to approve these two individuals to also be van drivers. And number nine, recommendation to approve extended school year services for Ian Greenfeld and Ian supplied this resource this past summer. And so you'll see that's 21-22 school year for those services happening this summer.
Got it.
Number 10, a recommendation to approve these performing arts events. And so these are staff members who are conducting performances or concerts or events with students this year, and this is the way they showcase the material that they're learning in the classroom, in the curriculum. And so you can see it's $150 per event and up to the number of events that they need to showcase those programs. Number 11, middle school. This is a recommendation to approve middle school after school tutoring program. Deborah Allen coordinates that program. And so it's a recommendation to approve the time that she'll be spending in doing that work this year. Sorry, number 12, recommendation to approve after-school extracurricular support. This is an individual who will be working with students and supporting students with special needs so that those students can participate in those extracurricular activities, which is a great resource. Again, talking about student engagement and student opportunities. Number 13, recommendation to approve these fall event workers. So these individuals help out with those different fall events. And then item B, you see a service agreement with Best Point. Best Point supplies our mental health therapists in our buildings. And so there's been a change. One of the things that we received this year was an additional person who's going in our middle school. And so part of that change comes with the request for the service agreement. In the past, our responsibility has been to supply spaces for these mental health therapists to work and to coordinate the referral process to the therapist. With this additional staff member and rising cost of those services, that's where this agreement comes into play.
So this may become an ongoing
It could be.
appropriation.
Yes. And then item C, the last one, this is a recommendation to approve an addendum to the Scarlet and Gray agreement. And we have recently experienced some shifts in custodial staffing. And so with those shifts, we have added Scarlet and Gray staff. So as people have been replaced, we've been utilizing Scarlet and Gray services. So with those changes, there's some changes to that contract. And so this addendum handles those changes. Anything you want to add on that? I think that's it.
May I have a motion to approve the superintendent's report?
So moved.
May I have a second? Second. May I have a roll call?
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Feldmeyer?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We're going to have a discussion now about our enrollment. We began it a little bit at our planning meeting, but well, she's gonna pass it for me.
I think she. Still need my. I'm gone.
Find bigger paper, I would use it, but the biggest I could find to fit the copy machine, so.
I said that with excitement, not derision.
Thank you.
Oh, no, we love them.
Thank you.
That's what makes band.
Getting there.
And I have to do that.
I think I might have one for everybody. Yeah, if there is enough. Perfect.
Oh. Yeah, I didn't even know that.
You should get some.
All right. Okay, so this is the time of year that we, take a peek at where we landed on enrollment at the end of the school year last year and sort of how that is shaping up against our forecast for this coming year. Before we even look at the sheet, we know that enrollment for any school district is really based on three things. We know that it's based on birth rates, how many people are coming into your school community. It could be based on housing, right? So if you're in a school district that is having, major housing developments, that your enrollment is impacted. And it's also impacted in some ways by economic development. In a certain part of the state, there's a giant Intel plant being built, right? And certainly around that economic development, those school districts need to be thinking about how that's going to impact their future enrollment. For us, there's only really one of those in play. And it really is birth rate and then mobility trends. So how many kids are coming into our community and how are those kids moving throughout our grades K through 12? Okay. And so we, on our sheet, we go all the way back to fiscal year 09, mainly just so we can identify some trends and hit some anomalies and see some big classes that have shaped up along the way. But I'd like to draw your attention and let's start the conversation in the yellow highlight that's the COVID year. Okay. Okay. Just so we can all get acclimated to where we are on the spreadsheet. So we're at the COVID year, fiscal year 21. So then let's move one to the right of that, and that's where we landed at the end of fiscal year 22. Okay. And so there's a couple grade bands that are highlighted there. And those tie back to some really large, sort of off benchmark kindergarten size classes. And so if you follow the green all the way back to fiscal year 18, you see really the largest kindergarten class that we have on the sheet. Okay? See that one? How many I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So how many kids are in that class? How many kindergartners in fiscal? 148, right? Everybody's in the right spot. And so you can see then how the birth rate data ties to that. So follow that column down to where you see live births. What were our live births that year? Fiscal year 18, live births, 88.
That was a
And you
gigantic.
And you can see how that live birth number really translated, so a really large live birth number translates into a large kindergarten class. I mean, that is fairly predictable. Super interesting that we can even get this live birth rate data. Ohio is the only state that geocodes birth rate data of the mother. So it's really awesome that we have access to this data and that we can, now it's not perfect, right? Because what we know is depending on the month that you were born and, your sort of preference as a parent, whether or not you send your kid to kindergarten exactly 5 years after you were born. So, we all know that there's a little bit of flaw in that data to begin with, but this is the best we have.
But is the 88 then the live births for fiscal year 18?
It's
Or the
live
ones
birth
that
from
would
5
be
years
being-
ago. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 years
Yeah.
ago live births.
Yeah.
So that,
So that
that
Yes.
they add to the large.
Yes. Yeah. And so,
Mhm.
if the percentage right below that is the enrolled to live birth ratio. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what we use to help us predict then. We take some averages of those numbers because, we had a pretty large birth rate, live birth that year. And then what happened the next year? It went down to 62, which was really in line with our sort of recent data, but we still had a pretty big class. So look at those enrolled to live birth ratios. Big giant swing there from 18 to 19. Okay. And we're only looking at this historical data just to kind of gain understanding about how the spreadsheet works, just remind ourselves how we do this. Okay. So we certainly had some anomalies, right? So we use the data to the best of our ability, but there are certainly some things that are, impacting our enrollment that are off trend, and I don't know that we can necessarily explain them. All right, so let's go back to, so we have our yellow column that was our COVID year. To the right of that was how we finished the end of the school year last year. And so then we have the current school year, which is forecasted fiscal year 23. So this is data as of 8/31. So at the end of every month, we have an enrollment report that comes from our buildings. And so at the end of the month, I update this sheet. And so right out of the gate, I have a couple observations. One, kindergarten is low or high,
Smaller.
high. Now, go down to birth rate for 5 years ago. Should we, is that
Should have been higher.
it should have been higher. Yeah, so when we talked about this last year, we talked about sort of this phenomenon of the red shirt kindergartner. Because what we didn't know coming out of COVID was how many people, we know there's some variance based on the month that you're born and whether or not, as your parents are thinking about whether or not to send you because of Ohio's bizarre, October 1, turn 5 rule, right? We know that. So we know that's already in play. And then COVID sort of added to that vagueness as we try to understand how these numbers are showing up in our enrollment.
Sorry, Brenda. But
Yeah.
like also if you look at back to fiscal year 12, it was 73 and there were only 109 kindergartners.
Right.
And
I mean, so we've
92
been building the
kindergartens,
trend.
right? So yeah.
Yeah, we've been building the trend, and then we use the 5-year average of the trend
Yeah.
to help us predict forward.
Yeah.
Absent any other data, this is all we have.
Yeah.
And so it helps us get close, but we know it's not exact. So, again, a couple observations. So a smaller than we had predicted kindergarten class. Down at the very bottom, so get off the trend and go down to the very bottom. That you can see what I had predicted. I had predicted based on applying the trend using our birth rate data for this year. I thought we were going to have 131 kindergartners. So we're actually a little lower than I thought. This is a statewide pattern. Now, what will be super interesting is when we get the birth rate data for next year. So the next cycle of birth rate data, because the next year that I'll pick up in terms of birth rate is fiscal year 26. which 5 years ago would have been COVID.
Mm,
So Ohio as a state has had about an 8-year decline of birth rate. So every year there's been a decline across the state of birth rate. So I'll get this data in the next 2 weeks. And so it will be super interesting to see coming out of sort of that COVID timeframe, if Ohio as a state takes a turn, and then what our Wyoming data looks like. Okay, so that'll be interesting. So back to the current year, so fiscal year 23, and what we know to be true now, at least, you know, as we sit here in the second week of September. So kindergarten is low. What about first grade? First grade's pretty high. First grade is pretty high and way off our trend. Our calculated average, so over the life of doing this, we expect via mobility every year to get about 13 to 15 first graders from kindergarten. This year we got 24. Now, is this a version of the red shirt piece? Did people go to kindergarten somewhere else? You know, there are lots of family stories in this data that we don't know what they are, but what we do know is that we have more first graders than I forecasted, and more first graders than we've had, you know, going back, you know, you have to go back to fiscal year 20 to even get, or I'm sorry, fiscal year 10 to get it, you know, up to 20. So it was
Oh, like
20
20 new.
fiscal year 10 to
Oh,
get 20.
in the
Yeah.
plural.
Right,
Oh,
right.
got it. Okay.
So that, you know, that's not something that had been in our recent experience.
14.
Okay.
Okay.
We had a number like on holdbacks, students who are repeating first grade.
I don't know that we had any students
We did, okay,
repeating
all
our
right,
first
so
grade.
that's not
Yeah,
an explanation.
yeah. Can say I don't, somebody would have to verify that, but I believe that answer
You
is.
sort of read negligible, it doesn't explain.
The only time you see it is sometimes people will put their child in a Montessori kindergarten and then put them in our kindergarten. You know, the very next year.
So far kindergarten is too low. First grade is too high. And second grade is also off trend. So second grade is down 3, and on average, we normally add 6.
No, wait a minute, oh, down to, okay, you're on the forecast of
145,
fiscal year
142.
23.
So just to the right of that forecast 23 is the shift. So we gained 24 first graders, but then from first to second, the mobility, we had 145 first graders. This year we have 142 second graders. So we normally gain 6. Our recent average is that we gain 6, but this time we lost 3. So Tim and I were a little perplexed by that because that felt odd to us. And so we pulled some of the kids and did a little bit of an exercise like we do for the ninth graders, and found out that we had a couple move out of state, a couple move out of the country. And then we did have a couple move to the east side, a couple moved to Butler County, but we did have some families making choices for non-publics. So there's no
After first grade.
from first to second. So no glaring overall, but certainly a mix. So 2 moves out of state, 1 move out of the country, 1 move to the east side, 1 move to Butler County, and then a couple move to non-public choices. So that doesn't bother me anymore, because that all seems kind of reasonable.
Right.
You know, movements out of the state, out of the country, you're moving to a different county, that could be job related. And so after that, things get a little more in line, but really this year is a little more off trend. A little more certainly off trend than I like to see it. But you all know that I like it to be super predictable.
What are the things that you say, have you concluded is more fun?
Well, we don't have major shifts, like for example, from Ilya from 5th to 6th, we normally gain 5 on average. Well, this year we ended up, you know, losing 1. So that's a swing of 6. Is a swing of 6 kids the end of the world? Absolutely not. It just, we've been fairly predictable against the averages within a couple kids. And so, you know, it's really it's really every grade level seems to have some nuances to it. And that's,
Especially K1,
Mhm.
K1, right?
So again, we use these trends, so we'll continue to apply this year to the trends and see if they continue to repeat and see if they impact us overall. Bottom line, we are down 40 students overall. Last year we were at 1948, this year we're at 1908. And we haven't been at 1908 in a while. You have to go back to like fiscal year 14 and 15, 13, 14 and 15.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not, kindergarten is in play there a little bit. Everything's just a little off what I expected it to be. And those all contribute to that -40.
Are there anything that would make this a trend?
I don't know that I can say that now.
Yeah, I was wondering, when you look at that analysis of first to second,
Mhm.
you look to see how many were public and private choices. I didn't know if we had the data across, was it like 9th to 10th grade, we were down 7? Is that, right? Usually when we talk about people going to different schools for high school,
Mhm.
that's where shit happens. or whatever. So
Right, and we look at that data every year.
all the time.
I can do that. I did not pull 9th to 10th, but I certainly can.
I'm just curious if that is also like a percentage of those moved out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that is, down 7 is really off trend. Our really we can do that about 0. Yeah. But it is interesting to keep watching the migration of those bigger classes. I have some yellow highlights to where we've been at least on my sheet, sort of maximum capacity in those buildings, not maximum capacity, just sort of max. Yeah, the highest. So that would have been last year at the primary at 722. The middle school, I have us at 647 in fiscal year 26. You go back to 650 in fiscal year 16, so that was after the middle school was renovated. Okay, so you just keeping an eye on that.
When those two bigger groups, right, something great.
And then, when you look at the high school, at least as I have it, up out to 27, we're nowhere near the maximum number that we saw back in 09 at 685. So, again, just a reminder that we use this tool from a staffing perspective. We think about what our staffing needs look like at each division. We look at it. We're certainly going to keep an eye on this as we think about primary facility planning. Knowing and understanding the birth rate data and at least applying the average, the average ratio helps us to have some version of a starting point. As it shifts every year, we'll continue to apply those average percentages and continue to, try and refine that data to help us make good decisions.
I'm looking down at the bottom, say for the sophomore, junior, senior enrollment. 10, 11, 12. Any thoughts, this is in line with our conversation about CCP classes. Each of those numbers, so 135 students for the 10th, 147, 11, 167, 12, is treated as a full-time student. It's you're enrolled or you're not enrolled. It's a binary kind of assessment. And yet, if we kind of do a deeper dive for a portion of those students, big, small, medium, they're not truly full-time equivalent students at Wyoming High School. So they're not taking up the space in the classroom. They're not full-time absorbing the staffing offerings and things of that nature. Any thoughts of later at some point doing a FTE, full-time equivalent kind of assessment for those 3? I don't think we have freshmen taking.
CCP goes down to the 7th grade.
Oh, well then
So we have our
maybe to
first
do
middle
that.
school this year taking CCP.
Because,
It also is like for our Oaks kids.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, so even
So
though.
we haven't done that at a level that shows up here, but we've had some general conversations about that.
Yeah,
It would be probably a good idea for us to start tracking it in some way.
so I've heard stories about students who basically come for 1 or 2 classes, maybe a choir class or something they can't get at a UC or Cincinnati State or something like that. And that's the extent of their
Mhm.
experience for that particular year here. And if so, and we're trying to use these forecasts to assess staffing needs, capacity needs, that would be seemingly relevant to how much space we need. The FTE.
I think thus far it's been such a small number that I can't imagine it would impact, but I guess it.
Yeah, it'd be good to have the data,
Yeah.
to have the informed conversation.
We've had about, anywhere from 30 to 50 children apply for CCP every year. That's on the high numbers, the high years. However, the actual amount that's scheduled, because they get the least priority of college scheduling. And what works within their schedule within the school day that they want to give up, is about 13 children.
I had in my head that it was less than 15, but I.
Yeah,
but I
13
confirm
this
that.
year. So we have a lot apply, but then when they
From
see the rate,
7th to 12th grade.
all through 7th through 12th grade, but then when they actually see how that impacts, like when they would have to go to the school and how that impacts travel and how that impacts their daily schedule, what else they can take, sometimes they back away from that because it's kind of not, it didn't fit quite how they thought it might.
It has grown though,
Yes, for sure.
so it is something that we should probably
And we have,
make a little sub spreadsheet of and just keep an eye on.
You just want to figure shit.
Trying to get to the next slide paper.
From to 13 from like 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we have
Like,
some
that's
students who don't
significant.
set foot at all on
Yeah.
the campus, that their entire day is college football.
Are they still enrolled in our
Yeah.
district? Those are making these numbers. So that isn't making these numbers.
But it would, if, I mean, let's just say we had some astronomical growth in those numbers, it would then impact our staffing conversations. You know, like, let's just say, you know, a class of 170 kids, and 50 of them all of a sudden
Sure.
enrolled full-time at
Sure.
Miami or UC or wherever, then you know, that's staffing and space impact at the high school.
Yeah.
Incredibly unlikely. But,
Right.
Although,
yeah,
no, but it wouldn't take too many to impact our.
Yeah.
I mean,
employees.
a section at the high school is about 15 to 20 kids, so if you start. For sure. Especially depending on the department.
so the theme of this year so far seems to be puzzling data.
Yeah.
So with our income tax payment, we're seeing it on the enrollment side.
Work hard.
Report card. So far, that is the theme. Some puzzling spots.
Always
Alright.
fascinating to look at.
It is always fascinating. I feel a little perplexed this year. I don't know. Just don't know.
What do you think since COVID? I mean, there's so many things.
We almost have to resolve to sort of live out a little bubble
Yes.
Yeah.
and then let it settle
Yes.
again.
I think
Yeah.
you're right.
Because it, you know, to expect it just to bounce back immediately,
Right.
is pretty unrealistic. And I feel like we're still living sort of the
Right.
Yeah, the way it was.
the wave of that
Right.
because of parents' decision making, especially at those early grades.
Right,
Yeah.
because I'm really wondering, you know, what the student's preschool experience has been and how that impacts their decision to move into kindergarten. And so I'm thinking that probably is impacting that.
Well, and sometimes people, because we don't do all day kindergarten, sometimes people take it another position for kindergarten just because of childcare,
Well, we do it, but.
and then come back to us for first.
Which may be impacting our first grade numbers this year, that people decided to sort of double up on kindergarten.
Yeah.
Because the COVID year was, as I would imagine, not a fantastic kindergarten experience if you were doing that out of the district,
Correct.
right?
Right.
So,
Oh, I can
then,
see
then
that.
maybe they decided to repeat it,
Absolutely.
and then, so now we have those kids coming to us.
And we don't know the effects of the economy, inflation, jobs. Right, so we'll see.
It's very anecdotal, but I was listening to it when I was still running at this time. Some guys in this running group that I was in, talking about their kindergartners and first graders and second graders, and how challenging it was to be able to, you know, at the age.
Right.
And how North Carolina is some other place for that year. Then I don't know if I stopped running, so I'm not with it. So, to know if they come back or not.
So you don't know the end of the story.
I don't know where that would even show up. You know, kind of, in terms of like the outs and the ins or.
Sure.
kind of thing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
What we know for sure is our first grade group this year is unpredictably large. To try and, if there's a way that we can try and understand that, I don't know how that helps us in the future. But I do think that it's just to me, I just feel like we need to resolve ourselves to kind of let this COVID bubble kind of maybe settle this year and
And then
then,
it'll reveal itself.
and then it'll reveal if we get back on trend next year. Because I do feel like it certainly wasn't a 1-year reaction, but it seems to be a 2-year reaction.
With the birth rate data from COVID.
The birth rate data is going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating.
My prediction
Statewide.
is, like, took a nose down.
I know.
You think it took notes back? Because
Well,
I think the
people-
initial intent is that people think it's gonna be high, then you spend so much time with each other, and you're sort of, you know what?
Yeah, it only takes like one time. Social distance. Next thing you know.
Then you know.
See those science scores going up next year.
Okay.
On that note, we're ready for your.
All right. Right, my turn. So as far as an update, my update is really just a shout out to our staff on what it's been an exceptional, we're just about 2 months in, an exceptional start. And I'm thinking about it through the lens of our strategic plan. And we know our strategic plan highlights the importance of academic achievement of our students, but it's built on this foundation of building this culture and climate where people feel connected and valued, focusing on social and emotional learning and health of our students and our staff members, communicating in ways that we partner with our families, all under the lens of financial stewardship. And so it's exciting to see how things happen throughout the district through those lenses. And so I was just thinking about this earlier today, when you think about some of the actions that our staff members are just taking through on their own. And so I've shared recently, the high schools have this Colts and Cowboys mentoring program. So mentoring new students, our current students mentoring new students and helping them feel connected, exceptional. High school, middle school clubs and the fairs. And I've gone to those and shared pictures of those and the crowds of students that are there and engaged and excited to be engaged. Students running those programs are it's exceptional. I had an email from a parent who was walking across the Elm Playground and noticed a communication board that's used to connect students that struggle in communicating with other students during recess. Another example of belonging, exceptional. I know our administrators are working on aligning their communication strategies, both with staff and with families. Next week, we have a professional development day where we're focused on the R factor, equals R equals O, and really thinking about our response and how to make sure that our response gives the best outcome for our kids. Excited about that. These conversations around data, instructional conversations happening at every building level. Staff members, examples of staff members stepping up to the plate to provide professional development for others here in the district and outside our district. All great things happening. Great examples of living through the lens of our strategic plan. We've talked about in the spring, we'll showcase some of those things and it's fun, it's exciting to collect all these examples of the ways that people are changing and growing and providing even better opportunities for kids every day. My challenge is to find ways to celebrate those great things because they're happening everywhere. And so we've gotta capture those and celebrate the good things that are happening. We don't do enough of that. And I think that continues then to grow those strategies even more. So it's just, again, shout out to staff who've done, I think, an exceptional job of coming back after 2 tough years with energy, enthusiasm, and passion for the work.
The other thing, I was thinking a lot about our planning meeting last time and the great presentations from the building teams. And in particular, I loved that Gina did a literacy night for families that talked about some of the science of reading and it's like an educational, you don't know what you don't know as a parent. And I was talking with someone I know who's a preschool teacher and she's like, is there any chance the preschool teachers in the area could get invited to that so we could prepare students for what's coming? And I'm like, I will mention that, but, yeah, so I mentioned that, but I thought, yeah, that, you know, cause
Great idea.
Yeah.
Right, it seems so obvious, and you're like,
And, maybe they would just send a representative from each of the schools, but they would definitely
Yeah.
be interested in that kind of thing. And even some of the, family nights at the primary, again, thinking about how to prepare their kids for coming here.
yeah. And when you talk about celebrating, I know you're also talking about teachers, but I loved last year that you did the board meetings, celebrating students and
Yeah.
teachers, is that?
We'll
in
do
the-
that. We'll do
okay,
that.
I figured it
That's
was,
just
but
what we do now.
Okay.
So that's in January and May.
great to do that.
Well, thank you. I think we are ready for a motion to adjourn. So moved. And a second,
Second.
and a roll call.
Mrs. Sheets?
Yes.
Mrs. Lawler?
Yes,
Mrs. Barker? Yes. Mr. Feldmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
all right, thank you.